Amelia and NASW for, really hosting these annually. I've been involved for many years, and they really, they advocate for funding, I think, in the right places to educate the community so we all can do better together. I think that's what it's all about. So I'm a clinician. I've never served. I've had the pleasure of working with first responders and veterans for just over 15 years clinically in both inpatient and residential and outpatient settings. So I speak kind of from a clinical lens of the work that I've done. And the first 20, 25 minutes, I'm going to go through some education on this topic. The best part about these workshops is, of course, the panel, which we're going to segue into. But just because we have so many people on, almost 300 people signing on, and I know the number's growing, so it's wonderful. There's all sorts of skill levels, right? So some of you who have signed on are more advanced in this topic in terms of working with people, veterans and their families, and some are not, and we welcome everyone. So I just like to frame the conversation with some slides before we jump in, so you can kind of like deepen your understanding real quick before hearing from our panelists, which are family members and veterans themselves. All right, so first of all, just a quote that I really liked: when a warrior serves in the military, his or her entire family serves and sacrifices as well. So just to set the tone with this, it's the full unit, family unit, and that unit looks different for everybody, just like with all of us, right? So the identified support system, the identified family, and I want to expand that even to whoever the person says is most important in their life. That could be a friend, a peer, it really can be anyone. We focus a lot on the immediate family, but I'm also going to touch on how extended family is affected by service as well, because that ripple effect really does go into family systems. All right, so we're going to go through about 15 slides, again, just with some information here. So challenges faced by military families. Sorry, there's a typo there. I see. Is there? Yes. Lengthy, let's just say lengthy separations from loved ones. No, that is right. Okay. A little dyslexic over here. Sorry, guys. So the lengthy separations, the amount of time apart, people always think of the standard of like, okay, someone deploys and they go off to war, right? Like these terms get thrown around, or they're in combat. But really, the second that person signs on that line, that's when the dislocation begins, whether it's boot camp. I actually have a niece who I'm very proud of. She just went off to the Marine Corps a few weeks ago, and it was like immediate, right? Bye. They took her phone. We can't communicate with her. So she's just at boot camp right now training, right? But turns out she broke her leg, and we found out during like a 5-minute phone call that they let her have, and now we have no idea really how she's doing. So that dislocation happens immediately, right? And then it just either heightens over time, or there's points where it lessens and then heightens again, right? Whether that's due to training, stateside operations, certain missions are not combat related. And then, of course, there are deployments that include things as severe as combat, where, the severity, it ebbs and flows, but the dislocation begins the second the person agrees to join, to be of service, right? So the frequent relocations that occur, we're going to touch on that as well. I'm not sure if everybody understands really what that looks like, but a military family could relocate 10 times, and that's completely normal in military culture. I know myself, I've relocated about 4 times as a 40-year-old civilian, and it is not fun, right? So just having that lens of like understanding for children, for spouses, and just anyone who's connected to that person, that movement itself can really have a lot of effects and strain on family dynamics. Children adjusting to schools, for example, that comes up a lot. People can feel isolated. There's some term I found that kept coming up with family systems as far as the military, and it's a common stress reaction. And it kind of just like normalizes this reaction that occurs, and it's the fear, anxiety, relocations, readjustments that the family goes through over and over again. Parallels kind of like a trauma reaction, but it's a stress reaction. And then, of course, fear, adjusting to new normals, losses that can come up. And that doesn't mean necessarily the loss of the person who's serving, although we'll cover that as well. Think about a time that you experienced a loss in your family, and what you needed at that time was a lot of maybe closeness from loved ones. So we can't expect and predict these things. So let's say there's a family and the person is not available because they're serving and there's a loss that hits that family. There are times where that person can come home for a short period of time. And there are times where that is not approved and they can't. So loss affects families. It's a natural process, right? And a lot of people will say, yeah, like my wife or my husband was not home during that because they couldn't be. And it was really hard for me because I had to continue being a parent and I was going through the loss of, my father, whatever it is. The general instability and unpredictability is something that we don't really talk about as far as like psychological impact. A lot of focus gets put on trauma and combat and things like that, but just that instability being the undercurrent that follows that family system for years usually can really cause different disruptions in psychological well-being, anxiety, depression, things like that can play out. During an actual deployment, of course, the concern, worry, panic, fear, disconnect, loneliness, increased pressures, increased responsibilities, having to learn new skills. And while you're in this emotional state, having to also like redevelop parts of your identity in order to cope and get through it. So that comes with feeling overwhelmed, sometimes frustrated and angry, perhaps, struggles with finances and other at-home responsibilities. And then on the flip side, wanting to understand what your loved one has been through, wanting to bridge that connection. Maybe worrying, like, are they still going to look at me the same way? Because people change within these families as, service happens. People change within relationships. So reunions can be happy and stressful, right? They can be both. There's a lot of strong mixed emotions that go into that reunion and reintegration process. Not just right away. A lot of times people describe a honeymoon period. That's the immediate. And then after that, it kind of changes into other things, right? And those realizations kick in. And attempts at reconnection that some may work. And then other times, if they don't, what that can lead to. The understanding, there was a colonel a chaplain colonel who mentored me early on in my career very closely for a couple of years. And he had always used, and you guys might have heard the story of like the canoe, and then the family is all in the canoe going down the river. And then the service member gets off of the canoe and the family keeps going. And then if they come back to the same spot where they were dropped off, they're going to be like, where's my family? But they are miles down the river. That analogy always stuck with me because that image of the canoe and the current that moves it, even if the family wants to remain intact and kind of stay where it's at, it can't, right? The system will evolve due to necessity alone. So when that service member re-enters, they have to travel a bit down the river to meet up with them. So there's kind of this understanding on both sides that changes happen and adjusting expectations around that. So, again, we focus a lot on the immediate family. Parents go through their own processes as well that are worth noting. And the relationship also changes with parents. Think of somebody who goes off to college. When that teen goes off to college, does their relationship with their parents change? Yes, right? During those years, I think the relationship changes kind of drastically. So amplify that times 1,000, right? So the person is going off to have this experience separate from, and the identity forms. And whether the person is 18, 25, or 30, it still has this same kind of departure and initiation, right? Where it's like they're becoming something separate from their upbringing, separate from how they were raised. So that relationship changes as well. And parents go through their own struggles with that, kind of adjusting to it. All right, so certain things about, when we talk about military culture, there's a lot of focus on like the veteran themselves, but military culture applies to families and family systems as well. So that acculturation that we talk about, like when the veteran becomes a service member, when they become somebody of service, the family goes through it too. Whether they know it or not, it might be subtle at first, but they get that same acculturation into service, right? So what that means in terms of like whether or not where they live, if they have to relocate, their benefits. Like there's so many things, and our panelists will go into some of those better than I can. But there's a lot of readjustments that happen right away for that family, and they're not necessarily fully prepared for it. So some of it, there's like a harsh adjustment that occurs in the beginning. Roles, routines, someone who develops survival skills when they're in service and then they come home and then the survivor skills are not matching the home environment. That's an adjustment that families go through as well. A lot of times there's compartmentalization on all ends. So children, spouses, veterans, right? So when they return, service members, they learn to kind of just keep going, just kind of box it up and keep going, because that's what we have to do right now. And then there could be these like bursts of like, okay, now we need to figure it out. And there's emotion attached to that. But many times that learned process of let's just keep going comes with like an emotional distancing naturally in the process for families as well. The mixed feelings towards service, again, we talk a lot about the veterans' experience of that, but the family may have that as well, where there's like a sense of pride and also a sense of maybe resentment that comes in at times. And then when the family becomes civilian again, right? So that arc of service and the evolution of that, just understanding and trying to have perspective of how a family member can go through that as well. So we're going to hear from some perspectives today from a bunch of these types of dynamics that you see listed here. Spouses, parents, siblings. We don't have children on the panel, but we might hear a bit about how children are affected as well. Extended family members and the veterans themselves. All right, so I'm not going to read all of these words to you. This is just like a few touch points on the statistics. So when I looked up like statistics, military families and service and all this, there's so much that comes up, right? So like the bottom line is that there are eye-opening stats related to how people are affected by joining the service and how families are affected by joining the service. But I like to kind of highlight a few of them. Just to see like the vulnerability points, right? Because if you're working with a veteran and their family, or just a family member independently, just a veteran independently, it's important to know that that person might be more susceptible to things that we're all susceptible to, but their risk level might be heightened due to the fact that they served and their readjustment. So unemployment is one of them. Family stability, so estrangement from family, divorce, spouses struggle to maintain their own identities and careers. So there's like a really high unemployment rate also among spouses, as well as academic success of children. There are some children who have trouble doing well in school because of the constant moves that they go through, and also anxiety complains that as well. And again, this doesn't need to be when we are at war, right? Like the common terms that we hear. We don't need to be in war or combat to have this affect a family system. And then, of course, like, the scare tactics, but unfortunately they're true. Things like suicide, addiction, we see a lot of mental health challenges that are higher, specifically with post-traumatic stress and like insomnia and anxiety, and unfortunately homelessness rates as well. So there are points of vulnerability, again, to be aware of. Like, I think that, veterans are amazing assets in the community, and you see people that come home and readjust and are hugely successful and able to do amazing things. But the ones that struggle, they struggle for a reason. And just understanding, like, there are people that go through domestic violence and then come out the other side, like really resilient and able to succeed and use what they went through to charge and motivate their life. And there are people that go through it and it really breaks them down, right? So it's really the same as any other risk factor. Like somebody who served has put their needs aside and sacrificed things that average people don't, right? So it's just putting them in this different category, I think, that we have to pay attention to and support. So we went through a bunch of this, but just, what I want to kind of like paint today is that there's impact points during service and then also when the person's home, right? So like those points of where impact or disruption can occur, just because like I think as therapist from a clinical point of view, you would think, oh, the person went home and they got to reunite with their family. And like from that point forward, maybe we can pay less attention. But that's not always the case. Because as with anything else, these things are complicated and layered and change over time. And it's usually more than one thing that could affect somebody and lead them into your office. So it could be work, relationships, finances, sense of purpose, sense of career, community, loss, like the list goes on, right? But it's usually not just one thing. And the challenges are hard to predict. We can't necessarily come up with a cookbook and say, these are the things to look for, right? Because it's life and you can think, oh, I'm really going to struggle with this. I'm going to be ready for that. And then something else kind of comes into play and it surprises you. So for us as clinicians and also for them, they might say, well, I really didn't think this would affect me, but it is. Pacing is really important clinically. So like working with people as things progress, as opposed to, again, bringing in that recipe guide of like, these are the points we're going to look at because the DSM says this, right? Like it's a much more organic process to be aware of. One of the panelists brought up generational differences among veterans and families. So like eras of service is something that is talked about a lot in terms of like how, for example, a Vietnam veteran may have different challenges than someone who served like OEF, OIF veteran, right? And like looking at that cross section of where the commonalities are and where the differences are. But we don't talk much about the families from different eras, right? So like a family from one era is going to have a different experience than a family from another era of service. So we'll go into that a bit. As well as mental health and how that's evolved over time. So somebody or a family and or veteran who went for mental health services 20 years ago is going to have a very different experience than one that goes for services now. All right, just 2 more minutes of slides and then we'll segue in. And if anyone has questions, please just use the chat box to drop those comments in there. Okay. So after effects complications, think short and long term and maybe medium term as well. When and where could these things come up? Losses that people go through, medical issues, mental health, and again, any of these other points. And we always talk about worst case scenario on these, right? So like not everybody has issues with relationships and is looking at employment struggles, right? But there are, the cases that we pay the most attention to are the ones that do. And worst case, how do you support a family when there is a suicide, which is now called like a postvention. So the prevention, postvention, how do we support the family through that? Or an overdose related death or a service related death, whether it was something that happened overseas or in combat or due to medical reasons related to service. How do we support families through that? I think it's a unique form of bereavement that family members need. And the idea of like self-care for families, I think is really, really important because in order to sustain, like stressing that a lot of veteran family members have said like the focus is not on me, it's on that person, right? Like it's has nothing to do with me. I don't get any, encouragement or people don't really ask me questions about how I'm doing. So when I started hearing that a few years ago, I just paid more attention to it. Like, all right, I need to ask more. Ask the family members themselves how they're doing, because many of them may again be like compartmentalizing their emotions, and it's going off the radar, right? It's not really being caught. So you'll hear someone who's like a caregiver in a family taking care of themselves, not taking care of themselves, taking care of others, and at the cost of taking care of themselves, right? So that theme comes up a lot. And then what to do with, and we have a couple examples today on the panel, thankfully, what to do when there are multiple veterans in one family and how maybe their needs are conflicting or their traumas or their communication styles are conflicting. So we'll also pose a couple questions today, like what services are available for families? What is important to a military family member? They're doing a lot of the work without necessarily the recognition of it. So they may not come forward and say, as a military spouse, these are the things I need, right? There might be less like disclosure of needs. And for some, it's just built into the whole like nobody really asks me type of mentality. And for some, it's bigger than that. It's like, what's the point? Because I don't think there are services out there for me, right? So things to consider, like peers for family members, like family members talking to other family members is huge. Just like for veterans, speaking to peers is helpful, immensely helpful. How can we give family members the tools and resources that they need, the education they need to become more aware? And what are the warning signs and symptoms to look for them? Many of them ask, like, what am I looking for with my loved one? And then also teaching them for themselves what some of the warning signs are to keep an eye out. Navigating resources is one of the hardest parts of the job as a clinician. Depending on the population you're working with, it can be easier, harder. This one is a little bit tricky because there's limited resources, especially for different locations, right? Like some locations might have a lot more resource for family. So we'll look at like how, when, and where to look and make those referrals. How to engage family members, what's important to ask about, helping them identify their needs, what to do when they feel isolated, maybe what are recommendations you can provide, and supporting the needs as they grow over time or change over time. All right, so what can we do better, right? Raising awareness, just encouragement, and having these conversations, I think, is tremendous. I love doing these panels because of that. It's a conversation we're having today in front of 300 people, right? So we're about to jump in front of the panel and really think of it that way. Like we're conversing about these topics really to help educate through the experiences of others. So grateful for these panelists today and them sharing their stories and experiences to really learn about what we can do better and what to really focus on. So these were kind of just like lessons learned for myself. This is the last slide, right? So just being more welcoming to military families, being attentive to their needs. If you know someone who's getting ready to go through a deployment, reaching out and seeing if you could help support them in different ways. Recognizing the service and sacrifice on their part. And it's important that we recognize the differences, but also the commonalities, right? Because a lot of times all they need is like support and maybe conversation about what's going on. So they may live this totally different lifestyle and this different culture, but at the same time, there are universalities between, what families need in general when they're going through a tough time. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists. So really in no particular order, I just kind of listed you guys. I hope this is okay. Please feel free, if you have served, to tell people that, and if you are a family member, to tell people just the relevance of why you're on this panel really today. So with that, just so people kind of can see and familiarize themselves with you, the first question is, can you tell us why you're on this panel today and why this topic is so important to you? So be sure you introduce yourself and let people know why you're doing this with us today.
I guess I'll pop on first since I'm at the top of the list. I guess we can go in order. Hi, everybody. I'm Jillian Nadiak Bruck. I am a sister who lost her brother to opioid addiction and undiagnosed PTSD. Professionally, I work for the Ulster County Department of Mental Health and opioid prevention. So I've been able to take what has hurt me the most, surround myself with it, and do something beneficial for the community. I'm not here as a representative of the Department of Mental Health, but I'm hoping that perhaps some of the work that I do can help inform our discussions. I'm not an expert in veteran services, but I have this lived experience, and I'm hoping that whatever I have to say, I might not have the answers, but to have all of you amazing professionals, family members, veterans in the room, you can draw upon whatever I have to say, and maybe we can come to some conclusions and maybe develop some strategies. In my work, I work with the people doing the work on the ground, the real work. and we find the gaps and we fill them. So having 300 people in the room right now, I think we could possibly do something like that. So thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks, Jillian. Being that she started it this way, do you guys want to go in order? We won't do this every time, but Cindy, do you want to go next?
Sounds good. I was just unmuting. Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Roberts. I'm a Gold Star mother. My daughter, Sergeant Christy Roberts, a little over 11 years. She was in the New York Army National Guard, and Christy was one of the 22 a day. We lost Christy to suicide. After becoming a Gold Star mother, our mission is to take care of our fellow Gold Stars and our veterans. And my husband and I have made it our mission, our cause to educate whoever we can and listen wherever we can and just hear what our veterans are saying. Not only what they're saying out of their mouth, but its actions often speak louder than words. I work with Adirondack peer-to-peer locally, our veterans locally group, and our Gold Star mothers. I'm retired from the Warren County Sheriff's Department, and my part-time retirement job is at Open Door Mission. When I volunteered down there, just hearing the first time that there was a veteran that was homeless, it was just another one of the many times of, eye awakening, just that, oh my God, we hate homelessness, but it's even worse when it's a veteran. So thank all of you for being here today. And my door is open, my phone's available, and we're here. And all of you are so important. Never for a second think that you are not alone or not important. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being present to this presentation. And my name is Mary Jo Gibson. I'm a clinical social worker and also a spouse of a soldier who has served when we married. He was a captain and we raised our 3 children. I currently am teaching for SUNY Empire, and I've been involved in this advisory committee since 2012. So as a clinician, as a family member, I feel like it's just continuation. We need to share information about veterans and their families, and it's just an honor to be a part of this this presentation today. And thank you so very much.
And I'm Chris Gibson. First thing is really to express gratitude to this entire community. What a huge difference you've made for veterans, and a testament to your professionalism that you're constantly looking to gain more knowledge and understanding to serve, and something I very much appreciate. I'm a 29-year military veteran. I started as an enlisted man at the age of 17. I was in the New York Army National Guard for 5 years. Became an officer through the ROTC program at Siena College and served 24 more years in the regular Army. That included 4 combat tours in Iraq, a peacekeeping mission in NATO, in Kosovo, and then also in Haiti for a humanitarian relief operation, and then a counter-drug operation in the southwestern United States. So here today to provide some perspective, not only as a soldier myself, wounded in battle in Iraq, and I will tell you that the presentation you got really hits home. I think it really did well unfolding some of the challenges and affirming that they are lifelong challenges. So perhaps we'll get into some of that throughout here today. But I speak not only from my personal experiences, but as a former commander too, in supporting soldiers who had been wounded and suffering from PTSD, and how important this nexus and this link is to this community, this broad mental health support community. And of course, having the benefit of being married to a licensed clinical social worker has certainly helped me as well. Thank you.
Do Danny next.
All right, Danny's never shy. Danny, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I am a U.S. Army as well as a former spouse to a U.S. Army veteran. So I met my husband while in service. We have a daughter, we co-parent. He is still in the National Guard out of Wyoming. So I have a lot of experience as both the soldier away from family and then having a family within the military. I had my daughter when I was active duty, as well as being a dual military house. That's been a dual military relationship is when both members of the military are a couple. So sometimes you'll see that as like Army or Army National Guard or Army Navy. Like it doesn't matter which branch. It just means that both people are of service to the country, and it makes it a little bit more difficult when you both have your own duty to the country and having a relationship as well. I am a creative arts therapist. I work with veterans at Outreach on a veterans track in substance abuse. And I also have a background in military sexual trauma and domestic violence. So I'm very happy to be among these people who really care and want to tell, you know, their lived experience so that other people can have a better fulfilled life, as well as hopefully in my terms, I would love, you know, this panel to be something people who are transitioning out of the military can see so that they can have a better start. Because for me, transitioning out of the military was the hardest time, especially being a military family. And so if people can hear our stories and see these facts and listen to what we've been through, we can make themselves up better for success.
Well said. Thank you. Melanie, are you ready?
Yes, I will go. Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Corinne. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, a writer, a storyteller. I've done peer support with the Dwyer Project in the past, and I am so excited to be on this panel. I am married to that cutie above me on the list, Dylan. We are both Marine Corps veterans. Dylan and I are high school sweethearts, and we joined the Marine Corps together. So, and we're still, we just turned 31 and we're still, he's still my best friend. So I'm very happy to be on this panel, not only with him to share our lived experience, but also with this amazing lineup. The people on this panel are just some of the most talented, wonderful advocates I've met in this field. And there's a lot of places to get CCE credits, and you guys chose to be here. So that is very telling of your commitment to veterans and communities. So thank you guys for having me, and I'm pretty excited to be here. Oh, and I don't know if I mentioned, but Arabic linguist. Hoorah to any Marine vets and linguists for the win. So if there's any other DLI grads in the panel, hi.
Dylan.
Hello, everyone.
Hey,
Can you hear
welcome.
me?
Yes.
Amazing. So hello, everyone. My name is Dylan Dambois. I am Melanie's worse half. Essentially, there's no way I can really follow up to that besides saying that I probably had the more boring job in the military as a data network specialist. It was really kind of terrible in a desert, but outside of that, I had lots of troubles and struggled when I got back home. And ultimately, it took me a long time to crawl me out of a dark place. And once I was able to find my way out of there, I wanted to lend myself into advocacy work. So I spent my time volunteering, and even now I'm embedding myself into VA disability at a law firm that now I work at. That has given me the ability to help other veterans around me. And I'm constantly trying to be a better advocate for the veteran community and its needs.
This is a really full panel. We don't always have so many people on. So yeah, it's great. It's great to have such a great like cross section of people. Did I get everyone? Yes, okay. I also usually could see everyone's faces in one screen, but I have to scroll now. But it's awesome. So thank you guys for putting yourselves out there and being part of this. So just the first question, it's kind of general, but who can you talk about like how a family member, it can be yourself, it could be in general, but how is a family member affected when somebody serves, just from your perspective? Like, don't worry about giving all of you know, all of those answers, but from your perspective, how is someone affected when someone in their family serves?
Happy to jump in on this one from a sibling's perspective. I hear a lot when we talk about the family being impacted, and I feel what's normally addressed is, you know, the parents, the spouses, and absolutely everyone is impacted. But to raise awareness to the sibling aspect, which is something I think we don't think about too often, and I think us siblings don't tend to think about it too often because sometimes we're very young. When my brother joined the Army, I think I was 10 or so. And I was so excited for him to leave because I'd be able to play his PlayStation. He wouldn't be able to tell me I couldn't use his computer. He couldn't dictate whatever I did because I was younger than him. So I waved goodbye to him as the recruiter took him away as I turned on his PlayStation and I started playing. I didn't understand what was going on. But as months went by and we didn't hear from him because he was in basic training, I started to miss him. But what really hit home the most was that during the war in the Middle East, his best friend was shot in the head and he survived. And my brother was in South Korea. And that brought it home for me because I knew my brother was next to go into the Middle East after he finished his first deployment. And as a very young child who's not being checked in on that because she was so okay with her brother leaving her, I'm pretty sure that's not why people weren't checking in on me, but I think it was because I was young and didn't understand the military. And, you know, we're worrying about mom, we're worrying about dad, we're focusing on those who are old enough to really get what's going on, but not those who aren't old enough to get it. But I understood what I saw on the news, and I was old enough to see 9/11 happen in 4th grade. And I was old enough to understand that my buddy, my brother's best friend, was coming home to us in a different state than he was when he left us. And I remember myself opening up to my best friend and saying, I think I'm depressed. And I was very young. And they said, I'm sorry. And that was the extent. So a lot of people are impacted when someone serves, and especially during wartime. And now, you know, even though we're not really, we've withdrawn from the Middle East, there's so many other conflicts coming up, and I don't have my brother anymore. And I don't know anybody in the service anymore. But when the news comes up of conflicts happening, I think I experience one form of PTSD and I start worrying for those I'm not even involved with. I start worrying about families who are about to lose folks, whether it be just a deployment or losing their life. And I worry about when they come home, you know, years from now, how that's going to impact our loved ones. So I think it's very important that we think about the young folks in these family dynamics, because I'm 31 now, and even when my brother was still here, I felt the impact of his service years and years ago. So that's my perspective.
Thank you, Jill.
That's like really valid. But like once you have someone pass and then have it seems as if a lot of people pass. For me in my experience, like I'm completely off Facebook because every time I would go on, I haven't been on Facebook in probably 6 years because every time I would go, I would see someone else I served with be lost to suicide, and then it kind of a chain reaction to multiple people. And now, as the years have gone on, and it's been longer than a decade, you know, I've lost a lot of friends, and it's really scary to go onto the internet and see who's still alive and who's not, and they're not in war. They transition back into civilian life. They weren't able to find the tools to help themselves. And for someone who hadn't been in combat like myself, I was in Korea, and I remember being in a foreign place, not being able to speak the language. I didn't have anyone from my unit. I was a single soldier going to the unit, and you know, I had a very crappy Skype call that was 12-hour difference, which most people get when you're deployed. You know, you leave a couple minutes and there's a bad connection, and your family feels left out of what's going on, and they are in constant fear that you're in danger and trouble, and they just want to check in. And now with technology, it's so easy to text someone, call someone. WhatsApp is, encrypted, and there's all these different apps now. And I would hope that it's better for the service members to stay connected to their family members, because for those, who had mail or anything else, seeing mail was like, the biggest morale boost from someone that you loved. But it was hard to kind of keep updated, let them know you're safe, or if you're not safe, kind of keeping that from them and kind of being more guarded with the information is hard as well.
I just wanted to share from perspective, working with children, our family, with our 3 children, and the first deployment that we faced as a family, and it's a family business, right? And as you've shared, everyone is affected. And there's a closeness that can occur within a family that is quite powerful. That you're the only ones moving, right? You are that smaller of the unit, right? That you become a part of in a military environment. So you're really close. And then I'll just say our first deployment we faced, our children were quite little, that while we were married, our 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 4-month-old, and Chris was deployed for a peacekeeping mission, and this was ended up being just after 9/11, and so it was, how were we going to manage that, right? Because he's no longer a part of it, and they were little, but they understood he was leaving, and so first thing I did was, first off, they allow for, there's courses that you can take. So before the deployment, I was able to take some classes to understand what to prepare for in this deployment. And then I had conversations with Chris about it. And then I also then contacted my sister, who's also a social worker, and talked about what are strategies that I can help the children to feel connected while he's not here, and how we can manage emotions. Because I'm like, as a therapist, I'm like, we're going to talk about our feelings. We're going to talk about it, and how are we going to get through it, though, right? And so I also talked to a really close friend of mine at the time who'd been through a year deployment with her spouse, and I was like, how did you manage that? And so I kind of did my own personal awareness and understanding how I was going to feel. I also tried to educate myself on the structure of what a deployment looks like, in the role he was going to be a part of. And then I developed with the children, like one example is like I created with them, thanks to my sister, this happy list. The kids could write down or guide me on what they thought would make them happy. So they would talk, so they could talk about how they felt. We discussed like what's going on, how you're feeling, what do you feel about dad going, and while he was gone, how are you doing? And this 4-year-old could communicate, right, how they're feeling. And then they would go to the back of their door and they could see the list that they created, so the 4-year-old and the 2-year-old had little lists. And before Chris left, they were like, Mom, you have to have a list. So I then had to put my list behind my door, and the 4-month-old had no idea. However, the 4-month-old did get impacted, right? And knew that, when Chris returned 7 months later, there was a change, right, for Chris and for them. So just kind of talking about how the experience, the closeness, and how do you sustain that closeness, right? And certain over time things that we did to continue to create rituals of behavior to keep those connections. So as they got older, and there was a deployment, he would correspond with them, right? He could write them, or I'd take them to at those times you couldn't do FaceTime, so you'd go to a location to do a video, which for him would be great. For me, it would be really rough when I left, because I had to deal with all the loss of him, and they'd recall what it's like to have the relationship with him, right? And just a final note on that, just another thing we had done later on as they got older was they would journal. They would journal every day one good thing that happened. And then when Chris came back from the deployment, and now we're talking, like 6 years later, we did this exercise where they would journal when he was deployed. And then when he came back, they would go over the journal together, so we're trying to sustain the connections for them so that there wasn't such a barrier, right? Because you could become either over attached to the person, or you can become avoidant of the person. And so I just did the best I could. Best I could. And because we were really connected and communicated a lot, that also helped in the process. So I hope it gives some another experience.
Those are awesome ways to cope, and that's like really healthy. So very, I love that idea. That's awesome. I know for my ex-husband, when his last appointment, he said 2 or 3 since my daughter was born, and he had, I don't know the name of the book, unfortunately. It's a Firefly book. I remember that, like a lantern, and it came with a CD, and inside of it was recorded of his voice reading the book to her. So at night she would read the book, and you
Hi.
almost
Number
you
one,
hear her
I'm
voice.
small lunch. Small. No, that's it.
And so she could hear his voice each night. Whenever she missed him, she would read that book. And that was something that was huge, because I think it was like his 2nd or 3rd deployment at that time. So she already knew what it was like to miss him. So this time it made it a lot better for her to just be able to hear his voice, even though it was a recording of it.
Yeah, I also want to chime in and say those are some amazing tools, and I wish I had those when I was young. My brother's service was just, that's what he was doing. And we were waiting for him to come home, and we waited for his calls. And then I went to school the next day. So having tools like that would have been really amazing to sort of process and acknowledge that what he was doing, while also acknowledging ourselves. That's amazing. Thank you for doing that.
As well as taking things home too. I don't know if Chris, you did that, but my ex-husband used to bring home trinkets from all the places he had been. He sent her postcards from every place he's been, from, you know, on the plane to Texas, to Germany, to the stopover to Afghanistan. Like he was very good with that, to send her each little thing to know where he is, like the paper writing, which was also really cool for her to receive email.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, our girls really still appreciate the tea set that I got from Kosovo and brought it back. So yeah, little things like that bring the connection, I think, for the family. Because I mean, frankly, it is very hard, you know, especially when they're younger. Because when you're 2 years old and you're gone for 7 months, it's, you know, that's a significant portion of their lives. So anything you can do to keep that connection going is really instrumental.
So just on that, you know, it was one of my questions. So I just want to segue into that. Like, what's been most helpful to adjust to, like, a lot of you were talking about changes that occur over time and different things that happen. So these objects that create connection, or these rituals that create connection, I think that's a really great concept, and something that maybe like a clinician can encourage, that a family member might not think of, right? Or a veteran might not think of. So is there anything else that comes to mind? These are like really cool examples to hear about that you guys have actually
I
had.
want to hear what Cindy has to say, because she looks like she has something.
Yeah, go for it, Cindy.
Really.
You know, I think one thing for us, you know, just looking at your question, how the family was affected, one thing for us was the rules that, you know, they told us. They said, don't worry her, don't, you know, don't share any bad news. So I think probably keeping all of that contained and thinking, okay, well, at some point she's going to know, or they're going to know. And, you know, my father-in-law, he took ill while she was away at basic training, and she was able to come home at Christmas time. And it just was huge, because you could tell when she got off the plane, she knew something was up, and was able to visit him at the VA. And then he passed away Christmas morning. So I think, you know, all of those things that, you know, what they're telling us, what you do and what you can't do. I think the rules, it was like, oh, geez, we're not used to rules, especially not rules as far as communicating with our daughter. So that was difficult. That was hard for us, but you do it. And, you know, one thing too, I think, you know, as far as veterans, whenever they have come home, we've seen a shift as far as the veterans wanting to volunteer and organize, or even to join things. I think the thing is, their families want them home because they haven't had them. But I think what I hear time and again, try to get them to get involved and join something, because they're all going to find their own mission, their own perspective, or their purpose. And I think that's one thing we do a lot as far as peer-to-peer, try to get them off the couch and maybe find their own mission. Because I think we need purpose. We need something to keep us going every day. And that's really what has kept my husband and I going.
I'm so glad that you have your support, because it's such a niche loss to lose a service member and a child at the same time is something that, you're so proud. I would assume you're so proud to have that child, and losing them is probably something that people to identify with that struggle, and having peer support is probably something that is very special and magical. So I was going to say with the deployments, the deployments and the trinkets, something we also did, so my daughter is a 4th generation Army brat. So there's a t-shirt that her great grandfather had, and then grandfather, and then father, and herself. So they've all, I think, got to a certain age, they wear that t-shirt, as well as my ex-husband's deployment shirts. When you go to deployment, a lot of time you have like the logo or whatever platoon that you're in, like kind of like a symbol. So he sent her back that, and then I would take a picture of her and it's to him, so he feels connected to her as well. Because there's a lot of loss on their side as well, and keeping up with the pictures, keeping up with their daily routines. But with children, it is very hard to explain to them. Like, I remember when my daughter was like 3 or 4, she was like, why is daddy always playing Army? Why is dad always playing Army? She was very upset that she couldn't have her father at the like family events and school events, and where other children had their parents. And it was really hard to be a single mom for the years that I was also going to school and working in jobs and having to provide for her, and her father's deployed. So she didn't have either family member to really grow with, but luckily my parents had stepped in and helped raise her. But like you said before, with the rules, like my strict rules compared to my parents' rules were very different. Grandparents get to spoil the children. So for my daughter, she knew both her father and her mom, had these strict rules and these standards, and then it would change. And then that's kind of like a code switch. And so to be so young and have to know the difference between 2 different styles of parenting, it can be difficult, especially when you're exhausted from just trying to survive on Long Island.
Yeah, we're all trying to survive on Long Island. But I love that. I think that, like that's so interesting about like specific family members have those different relationships with their service members. And like, as a spouse, even though, we're both dual service members, as a spouse, I wasn't necessarily the one that was able to help dealing with his stressors when he had them. But like when I was on deployment, and I was deployed for I think 6 months, and every night that I would call my grandma, because there was nothing more comforting than hearing her voice. And so like for family members, setting up those networks of support for them, I think is the consistency, like how do you cope with these changes, I think was the question. That consistent support. And so consistency, like for me, I could pick up a book anywhere, and immerse myself in a little bit of escapist storytelling. Dylan did a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. I imagine like for kids it's being with family. But yeah, connection is really important, and that can be hard because that connection might not always be between the service member, just like Jillian was talking about, it might not always be between the service member and the family. There still has to be someone there that provides like that emotional connection. So maybe family members, I don't want to say commiserating, but like in solidarity, sharing the difficulty together in lieu of their service member. I think, definitely physical activities, getting together, doing projects might help. I always found a lot of solidarity with other military spouses, when like Dylan was playing D&D with like the other veterans, just being sharing those stories, swapping like lived experiences. So that always helped me. Yeah, so sorry.
I definitely, I want to jump on that really quick, Melanie. Like the idea of peer supports for family members could be so beneficial, not only to family members during the time of service, but for them to be proper supports in the future when they're needed for their family member. So for example, after I lost my brother, I was introduced to the program TAPS, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. Incredible program, and I'd recommend it to literally anyone who's lost a family member in the service. However, I would hope that we wouldn't need that service if we had something like that before someone passed. So to support each other, develop our tools while we're here, and maybe if we did that, we wouldn't need so many peers for family members who've lost someone. Yeah, so peers for veterans, peers for family members, establish those social supports.
I am the first time I heard you talk, Jillian, because again, military spouse, but I didn't mention this in the intro. All three of my siblings are also service members. My mom had four. My mom was born on Veterans Day, and all four of her kids joined the military, 3 Marines, and her son-in-law, Dylan, also Marine. And my grandfather was a Korean War vet. So we like do have a big military family. And the first time, Jillian, I heard you talk about my brother, my brother, who's a recon Marine or was a recon Marine, like I felt so much pure solidarity with you and your story. My brother is with us, but because of what you shared, I was able to connect with him later and tell him about that story, and like the peer support you provided without even really knowing about it, just by sharing your truth, really enriched my relationship with my brother. So I appreciate you. Yeah.
In all honesty, family connections are some incredibly hard ones to maintain when in the military. When we talk about that separation that occurs, the thing that I have to admit is the fact that it's not always the service member that hungers to have a relationship. I was worried very much about trying to emotionally deal with my military career and thrive in it as best as I could, and sometimes even just survive it. And that mostly wound up bonding to the people around me because I had other service members around me. I had service members' spouses around me. I did not have my family, all except my wife. So maintaining those sorts of familial connections is at times draining and difficult. And the only connections that I felt had maintained happened largely because of the actual force put into it on behalf of my family. Calls from my grandmother, visits from my stepfather, visits from my mother, all of which they were very insistent on trying to keep up a routine with me. So where I was falling short of being able to maintain that kind of a relationship and connection, it was really their dedicated effort that helped maintain that sort of thing. And I'll be eternally grateful to them for maintaining that even when I was being negligent of it due to my situation. And I think that if families understood from the beginning that if they want to have contact with their kids or with their relatives or anything like that, it would probably be best for them to be proactive with it because of how difficult it can be for various service members to obtain that connection organically on their own.
That is recognized, the disproportionate impact, the way families carry that emotional labor more so than the veteran, so that the veteran can focus on their mission. Everyone here appreciates that because it's not easy.
And two challenges we had with our kids. Well, on the one hand, they certainly did get close because the constant moving, they had a built-in friend network. The opposite side of that is they had attachment issues. Making friends over a couple of years of assignment and then leaving them and then moving to a new place, making friends and then leaving them. So by the time we got back to Kinderhook in upstate New York, we had some adjustment challenges for our kids. And, attachment issues was one. And the other one was that we weren't really at top of mind initially, was just how pressure laden it was with the paratroopers that were killed during the tour and wounded. And so there's a you know, there's an effort to keep a positive face on things as you're trying to endure and go forward. And so, you know, the kids would feel a sense of, you know, presentation or performative that, you know, sort of put the best face forward. And that's a lot to put on young kids. And so for us, it was a consciousness to become aware. And what we realized right away is even though this is a very loving community here, there wasn't a lot of like military support or even veteran support immediately here. And so just working that and then making connections and then reaching back to their friend networks they had still in the military. So I think, you know, for the mental health community, what I saw in the chat box is, you know, that this, you know, the idea of services for children of service members, it's very heartwarming to see how empathetic and proactive that this community is now trying to reach and be available for children.
And creating community, right? Creating community where you are. So going through that adjustment to new community, you know, we're living in our home and they're used to a military post. You know, they're used to that, and they later on talked about going to college and feeling at college, it was kind of a military post experience, but felt quite at home for them, you know. So it eventually transitions, you know, where you figure out, oh, this is a space where I feel a community. So I feel like finding one's community is so important, and finding one's purpose, as Cindy talked about before. Everyone in the family has to find their community, find their purpose, and what choices we do have and what resources we do have. And I have to say even as simple as Sesame Street programs are there for young children, and I don't and really is worth looking at how one manages. There's in our community here in New York State, you know, we and others have NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness, has Home Fund program, and Home Fund trains families to understand and educates families to how to understand their veteran, right? And so it can be for veterans, it can be for family members of veterans. So I think we have to keep developing, as we're talking about, resources, right? And peer support. And I saw Patrice talking about TAPS. It carries through 11 years further. Everyone it's an ongoing, right? And you want to have that tie, that connection from then to now, right? And using the resiliency that we all have in this experience, and how can we apply it now? And I think the more we can develop our resources, the more everyone can feel connected, because we are connected. And so I think it's continuing that creativity and that connection. And one last tip too is the Vets for Warriors, which we had General Graham speak on a while ago. Vets for Warriors is a 24-hour line for veterans and their families, 7 days a week. But we'll need to put together our resource list and try and put it up on the listserv as much as we
Mary
can.
Jo, for Vets for Warriors, that's no joke. Like, people get kind of nervous about calling a line that they don't know what's on the other side. And when military family members say, what can I do for my vet? If the vet isn't ready to talk to that military family member, there are real veteran peers on the end of that Vets for Warriors line, and they're the only subcontractor for the military veteran crisis line. So when you call that 988 press 1, that goes right to them, Vets for Warriors. They got like 60 staff members. They're out of a call center, Rutgers University. They're national. They're 24/7. The best thing for a family member that's feeling overwhelmed is to give that veteran their family member to another vet to work with, so they have that time to wind down, so that veteran can get peer support. Jillian at a different point once brought up that she wanted so desperately to be there for her family, and like I at a different point, like Dylan and I were best friends, but when we were at the peak of our stress from the military, we couldn't be there for each other. We could not be there for each other. Like, I was stressed from the mission set. My command was great. My mission set was making me have panic attacks every day. His mission set was not very intense, but his command was toxic, and they were like hazing him. And we would get home, and I couldn't be there for him. The best thing, and he couldn't be there for me, and it was hard. The best thing I could do as a family member was like give him space to be with other vets. And Mary Jo was talking about it, but the military vet crisis line, that Vet for Warriors, will do that for your veterans. That is a phenomenal resource. I've used them myself. Like, they're wonderful.
Cindy, you're gonna say something?
I would just want to jump in here too, just real quick, listening to, you talk about veterans to veterans, and I don't know how Jillian feels, but it seemed like after we lost Christy, there was a disconnect. I think people that knew her and, maybe served with her were afraid to contact us just because of how she had died. And as the years have gone by, I have met people that have come up to me and said, stopped at Dick's when we were doing fishing licenses and said, are you Christy's mom? And they are afraid. They were afraid of how we would react, if they were going to be the one to make us cry. And just folks, just so you know, anybody that knew Christy or, and I hope I could speak for Jillian too, or any of the other Gold Stars, if you knew our child or our family member, that's a gift to us. We have no more birthdays or that kind of celebration. And just you telling us how you knew Christy or how maybe you worked with her or whatever the exchange was, that's a gift for us. And please don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to make us cry, because those are happy tears of joy remembering our child and our family member.
Yes, Cindy, you did an incredible job speaking for me, because all of that was spot on. And especially when we lose someone to something like suicide or overdose, the years leading up to that person's loss can be a unique one. In my brother's case, he sort of retreated a bit, didn't really associate with family too much, except in the last couple months, he like came in full force. It's like he knew he was going or something and wanted to make sure he was with us. But it was interesting because people say they're sorry to me, and I always respond, I feel like he's with me more now than he ever was when he was with us. I feel like he's on my shoulders guiding me in my life. So in a weird way, it's when people say they're so sorry, I don't have that much of my brother other than his spirit at this point. So every time I get someone who reaches out to me and says, hey, I knew your brother, we did Boy Scouts together or something, and they apologize and say, I hope I'm not bringing anything bad up for you by reminding you. It's like, no, I need to be reminded of my brother every 5 minutes. If someone approached me every 5 minutes and said, I knew your brother and this is what I thought of him, that's important to me, especially because I am afraid that the legacy he left behind is misunderstood. I started doing advocacy for a scholarship. I started a scholarship after he passed, just so I could get butts in seats and tell his story as it deserved to be heard. Because otherwise, all people knew was he was that kid from Ellenville who went in the Army, came back, and got addicted to drugs. And that wasn't his story. He was 2004 Army Soldier of the Year. He was my hero, and he did a lot with his life. So anytime I get a positive story is valuable to me, because his social circle was dwindling, and the main social circles he had in his life was those he served with, and they were dwindling as well. So it's very rare that I get to meet anyone that knew him, or had not to say something positive to say, but yeah, it's hard to put into words, but Cindy, you got it spot on. We celebrate him, celebrate your daughter, and I just hope everyone can always know that they should go to folks and celebrate them with them. Don't be afraid of bringing up bad things, unless the family member explicitly says, don't talk to me about my loved one, which I think would be more rare than we would think.
I think too, just, to tag on that, coming up, November is so busy with Veterans Day events and things like that. And so many veterans will say, don't say thank you for your service, or don't say this. And you know what? The thing is we know, we get it, we understand, and we know maybe that's not the words, but just know that we don't mean any harm by thanking you. We just know we could not be able to have these events if it wasn't for people like Chris and all of our veterans that have fought for this freedom that we're able to do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. And so I'm just so grateful for those that signed up, including Christy and your brother as well.
It's really important that the continuing to say their names and share their stories. I see on in the post. And for veterans who are looking for those communities, we talk about you know, creating our own, you know, chosen families when we're in the military, because it is like a revolving door. Depending on your MOS, you can be in so many different duty stations at so many different times throughout the year, and building those connections are really important to feel safe. So as a veteran, when I was gone for a long time, I came back and didn't know where I felt comfortable. So I was lucky enough to meet veterans who do the rock marches and the kayaks, and we're celebrating the veterans, and we're putting their names on a flag, and we're respecting them and their service, but we're also telling people about their stories. And each mile we do is because they're not with us anymore, and to always remember them and bring them back to life for those, you know, those hard times, because it is something that's physically demanding a lot of those things. But the 22 is always something that is going to be in veterans like foresight, because those 22 is a number to some people and they're names to others. And so I would really encourage, if the veterans are looking for a community and they are looking for something to be part of, is also to remember those that were once part of their community and bring it to their communities now, and do those events and meet new people and find a new purpose. Someone did also mention the USO, which is something that people don't really use as often. And the USO is really great. I actually texted my ex. He said the USO was the one who recorded the book for my daughter, and I just put it in the chat. It was called Frenzy's Light. So if anyone was interested in doing that for their child or something similar, I threw that in there too. And as you know, like USOs are often in airports too. If you need a place to sleep, if you're going to the next place, like USOs aren't only on military bases. People didn't know that. And it could be just a safe place for someone to sleep on a layover, or you know, going to their next flight, or just needs time to reconnect in case people.
Melissa, you guys are great. You're, you know, completely on point. There were 3 questions I had lined up, and you all just answered all 3 of them. So Cindy and Jillian, I just want to give you both a lot of credit for like disclosing at the level you are and really giving us that kind of like gift of insight based on something, you know, dark that you went through. So I think that that's just really powerful. And I think you're right that like a therapist might even walk on eggshells a little bit around certain topics that they shouldn't, that are, it's not helpful. And I'm glad that you both kind of brought that up. So yeah, I was going to ask how to support a family member through their darkest time in the event that they lose a loved one who served. But you really did, you know, you touched on that so beautifully. And the whole idea of disconnection and connection and how to bridge that. So I think, you know, let's just make it like as applicable as possible. Let's say, you know, there's a therapist, hasn't really worked a ton with vets or with, you know, the military in general, and someone is in their office for, let's say, depression, anxiety, something general enough, and they disclose that they are a family member, right? Like their loved one is serving right now. What would you want how do you want that therapist to address that, right? Like, what would you recommend in terms of having a clinician? Just like, what do they bring up? How do they engage in conversation? What are some things that you would want to hear? What's maybe something you don't want to hear, right? Like some do's and don'ts. What comes to mind?
Oh, so immediately coming to mind, I'm thinking more strategically in like my professional world here. So it's not necessarily how to support the person, but the veteran. So I'm just going to tackle this anyway because I think it's important, but not necessarily directly related to the question. Safety planning. It might bring, if the person in the office is a family member and they're feeling concerned for their loved one, and that's part of why they're feeling this way, helping them safety plan around their family member might be beneficial. Now, I'm not a social worker, but you know, if you're depressed or you have anxiety because you're worried about your loved one who's in service or is a veteran, a way that I at least would feel comforted was if someone gave me tools at all. Before I lost my brother, I had 0 tools. Opioids were barely understood. And when my brother brought pills into a concert with me and he said I might need one, even though it was only 2 hours long, I didn't deny him. I didn't understand how his pills worked. He was on them for 10 years. He was the expert, not me. So helping someone's safety plan around their loved one, whether it be what resources are you aware of if your loved one asks for help, or okay, so you think they're struggling with addiction, well, here's some ways that you can support them. I don't know. Again, I'm not a social worker and I don't have the details, but safety planning, if that's in your head at all, if you want to toss that around while you think about how you can support folks, that could be very helpful, because a tool for anxiety that I know of is dispelling those anxieties, and having tools helps you not be so anxious.
I love that. I'm with Jillian. The more information that, family has, the more tools in their belt, the more well equipped they are to go forward. As you know, when I had stresses and troubles as a spouse, what I noticed is that all of my military benefits as a service member was there as a network of support for me, like a safety net for me. So what I'm, pretty aware of is that, my spouse, military spouse, colleagues that are not veterans, and, military family that don't have those benefits assigned through service don't have the same finite institutional support. So as a clinician, as a professional, any sort of actual structural, like nonprofit support, government program support, any sort of education you can do on your local area to help people that walk through the door would be great, because when I had those questions, all of those resources were tied to my benefits. But like, when I was with the Dwyer program for 2 years, I'd always run into military family that needed things. And one thing I found was like childcare, helping family members, childcare, that was a big thing. Also caretakers. And I haven't worked with this foundation much, but I know the Elizabeth Dole Foundation provides small grants to caretakers that have issues. It's like a direct thing. Like if their car breaks down, they can apply through the program and get they'll pay the mechanic, not, an institution or the person themselves. But like Elizabeth Dole was some politician that put effort into supporting caregivers. So they have a whole peer network of support. And just again, crunchy, finite resources for support. That seems pretty important, because I could get all those through my service, but so I was helped when I needed help working as a wife, working through my concerns and my stress with Dylan. But when I met people in the community as a veteran peer, I noticed that those institutional supports were not there as much.
And some of the resources that I really saw be so helpful for veterans were not ones that would be immediately top of mind. Equine therapy, and as an example, and what it really was is some of the vets felt so isolated, alienated, and alone that they didn't even think intimacy was possible. It was never going to happen for them. And what the equine therapy did is it's intense. I went and saw it there in Saratoga. There's this bonding between the veteran and the horse. And at the end of the 48 hours, the veteran goes home. There's no more contact with the horse. The point isn't this long-standing connection with equine. It's the fact that they can have something, a living being, something living, understand them. And the fact that they actually thought they could have intimacy again, even if it was just with a horse that they felt understood, seen, and affirmed, they actually could go home and then try again with other humans. And so I'm just very thankful that something that didn't seem initially that 2010, when I first became aware of it, and then I actually saw it work. And I'm very grateful for it. So I just want to echo these points on resources and know that sometimes these resources can be very creative, but are really designed to help a veteran that's really struggling, I mean, at the end of the line, and at the very end of the line, and the idea that they can have connection with living beings, with equine as an example.
I love what Chris was just saying as far as the equine. And after we lost Christy, I read everything because you just have so many questions. And I think the thing is, I think the classes for Safe Talk, they're a great starter, but I like the Columbia Lighthouse, and I just want that to spread out to police, fire, and EMS as well as the veterans, because it is veterans, but it's not just them, it's their families. And I think we just need to spread that word. And I think there's a lot of, as far as I find with our veterans, they like to use their hands. And when they're using their hands, they're talking. And whether it's art for vets, or whether it's music or whatever it is, I think if we can just get them engaged, even a little, just bring them out a little, and I think it will grow.
It really helps with the isolation to get something on the calendar, anything on the calendar that they can look forward to. 6 more days in a week of, all the things that we were excited to do, even, waiting for Christmas. If it's something that they are interested about, whether it be art, music, equine, traveling, in, roughing, adventure, it's something. And then you have that person who's going to check in on you when you meet that connection with someone else. And I believe that that's really what's keeping most veterans and family members alive, is just having someone who sees you and you feel seen and heard. And that's like the most important part of being part of the community, you have to be open to try new things. And even if it's scary, you got to do it anyway, because there's a lot of things in the military I did that was scary, but had to do anyway. And at the end of the day, I was like, I did that. So, trying to get that kind of perspective again is something that's really worth it.
These are great recommendations, guys. Thank you. And resources and everything you're giving to the audience. Thank you so much for that. Does anyone have anything else before I?
So I got a little distracted because the chat is so active and I'm talking to a bunch of people. So I think we were talking about resources here. So I was nervous to jump in thinking I was going to get off track. But yes, I believe I heard everyone saying all these different opportunities for not necessarily therapy-based resources, which is so incredible. Holistic approaches to the whole person are amazing. And I encourage everyone, no matter where you are, I know we have people all over here, so I'm not going to talk about Ulster County, but there's a lot of programs. So Google for programs like warrior writers, writing programs for veterans. Here in Ulster County, we have a wooden boat building program. Anything that can get hands-on in the presence of other veterans, I have found to be so beneficial to the veterans that I've worked with. I know I'm here as a sibling who's lost, but as a result of my loss, I tried to throw myself into the world. Like you said, Cindy, doing everything you can to research, to find out, because you have all these questions. I found so many resources that my brother could have taken advantage of, but didn't because he didn't know they existed. But I found out because I just wanted to dive in. So I now know a ton of veterans and all these programs are just so amazing. And so it's important to have that clinical side, but in addition, to really broaden that approach, those holistic approaches, anything to get your hands on things while you're with other veterans and those peer sources is just, I've seen has done amazing things.
I linked the Niswani's progressive practices panel that Anissa curated a while ago. I linked their YouTube if anyone's more interested in progressive practices.
I was going to add to the VA has several different things as well. In addition to we have there's peer specialists program that they have as well. I know in the community we have the Dwyer program, but the VA does have also a peer specialist. They have some equine now that they've started doing. There's art therapy and music therapy. Couple work that they're doing now more. There's actually someone who's doing particularly focused on some family work. And I was going to say, as we're talking about, just in relationship to, say, couples, that, the understanding the communication of each other in those sessions, like that have worked with couples, and one expectations and the other one's expectations for what they're even focused on in their relationship, right? And so understanding sometimes people's expectations for each other. And I bring that up because even in the military, there'd be strong bonds, would be a program that couples would go to after a deployment. And those who are in National Guard, they have the Yellow Ribbon program that gives a lot of resources to families as well. And but the communication and connection of what is the relationship that you want to have with each other, and understanding that sometimes the veteran, male, female, whoever served, or both. And I thought it was beautiful how Dylan and Melanie talked about, understanding is sometimes the need is not met from the other, right? And that's really important. It's really understanding oneself. And I think finding the clinician might be helpful. Talking to a peer might be helpful. Talking to a chaplain, if you are serving in the military, or you go to the VA and they have a chaplain on site. Talking to a friend, talking to a family, allowing yourself to get in touch with yourself, right? And making space for sometimes sitting in silence. And I think it's really hard for folks to get connected with themselves, and being mindful and in the moment. And I think the more we become aware of what we need individually, the more we know how else we can connect to others. So I think that we have an amazing amount of resources, and we need to keep putting them out there, because each person is so different and each person's needs are going to be met differently. And but just knowing that we're all connected. And please reach out. And there's so many people that have been on this today that are passing in so many amazing resources. This is could be the tremendous panel of 300 plus people. So I feel like this is just rich, and it's really, really, really personal. And I'm grateful that we're able to do this together and make it so intimate, and which can be really painful topics, but also really rewarding to be able to connect with others. So just wanted to share that.
So I don't want to lose, there's one question I don't want to lose. It's a little off track from what we're talking about now, but we'll bring it back. But I think it's really relevant. The question of how to support when there's more than one veteran in the family unit. I think that could be tricky, and it happens a lot more frequently than you think. And it's something a clinician could be surprised by. And we don't want that. We want to be more equipped to handle these things. So not necessarily a relevant question for every panelist, but for those that it is relevant to, can you speak to the best way to support, or just some things you would want a clinician to know if there's more than one veteran in the family unit?
I need to jump into that.
I know you do.
So important. I mean, Dylan and I would not have stayed married for 15 years if our communication wasn't good, and if we weren't best friends. So we were able to work out a lot of our problems through communication, which was hit or miss. But we had trouble finding an accessible clinician to support us with couples counseling. We went through the VA. And it was during that transition period where, Dylan said he was struggling and things were a little rough, and neither of us had we were still in process on undoing a lot of the trauma we held from our active service. And we would step on each other's pain points all the time. And it was kind of now looking back, it's kind of comical. And now when it happens, we'll be like, oh, this is happening. We'll just give each other some space and wind down. But we went to this couples counselor, and it didn't really work out. And at one point, we later on, we were with a friend, and we got into the same sort of argument that we had gotten into in front of the couples counselor. And a friend of ours looked at they looked at Dylan, they were like, hey, do you hear the way you're talking? And this was really interesting, because Dylan's like, no, I'm making so much sense. And he's like, you're not. And Dylan said, well, wait a second, if I'm not making sense, why didn't the therapist tell me? I was relying on the therapist to help me see things, equitably. And so, Dylan really put his trust in this clinician to help us work things through. And I think maybe they didn't have the professionalism or the ability to really say, hey, you might be in the wrong on this, or not even that not even that harshly, but they didn't have the ability to say, hey, this is not a an equal scenario, right? And so the clinician, for one reason or another, did not feel comfortable sharing like a hard truth. And as soon as anyone shared that hard truth, Dylan's, you know, he took that, he self-reflected, he did everything you're supposed to do, but we had gone through like 8 months of struggle because the clinician didn't give him the opportunity to really self-assess because they wanted both of us, I guess, to feel happy. Yeah, please, Dylan, you say something.
So the thing that I really have to bring up when it comes to that is when it came to the clinician in question is the fact that a clinician, if they are going to deal with veterans, be proactive with the veteran. And the thing is, I don't think the clinician understood what they were kind of getting into, because they were probably used to single therapy or dealing with someone just talking at them. But that doesn't necessarily work for a lot of veterans, especially when it comes to connections and things like that. Veterans need to be given objectives. They need to be told facts. They need to be given the ability to reflect and improve. And when someone's just going to listen to you and talk at each other and give you no real validation of what is or isn't correct, you're just kind of out on the ocean without a mooring. It's problematic. And the only way I really feel like you could solve that is by having anyone who is going to be a clinician to veterans have an intimate understanding of, I have to set expectations, boundaries, conduct, what is and isn't all right, and many things like that, just in terms of just helping the veteran reacclimate not only like to the connections around them, but to literally civilian life all over again.
Don't be afraid to be assertive with your veterans, you know, sometimes they need it.
The best outcomes I've happened to have as a peer mentor with veterans is when I was painfully honest with veterans. And many people were very confused because I was talking and discussing topics with my veterans that everyone's like, no, 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 you shouldn't bring those things up, or you shouldn't talk about such a charged topic, but these are the things that they live with, the thoughts that they have. And if you don't engage with them, you're constantly treating them with kid gloves. How are they going to expect to improve on themselves and actually feel like a productive member of society if they're constantly either being limited by the rhetoric that they're being forced to use or how people engage with them?
Danny, you were married to a service member for a long time. Thoughts?
We didn't try couples counseling. I was going to school for art therapy. He was going to school for, I believe it was criminal justice at the time. We didn't really work on a relationship. We kind of chose ourselves rather than the relationship when we got out. And so I appreciate that you guys did try. For us, it wasn't we were in love when we got married. It's something that we could talk about is fraternization in the U.S. Army. He was a sergeant and I was a specialist. So it was kind of a matter of if I was pregnant and if I didn't marry him, you know, there was going to be repercussions. And although I didn't know him very well and he was a good person, he was a good guy, I only had known him for a few months before we got married. I got married and 6 months pregnant. So the topic of marriage in the military can be, you know, just as that. It was something that we did so that we didn't get in trouble. And it didn't help us when we got out because we didn't know each other. And the marriage was not strong. And we still co-parent and everything is, you know, is okay now. But for two people who struggled with complex PTSD transitioning out, we didn't have as many resources. I got out in 2000. We got out a month apart from each other. And you know, one of the things that something of guilt that I had to work through getting out of the Army when I wanted to be a lifer and I was that stellar soldier was, you can look at my DD-214 and you can see my awards and my ribbons and the things that I've done. But when you look at the bottom, you see the discharge is for family care plan. So I got out because I was pregnant. And when you're a dual military couple, if you can't complete the mission, then one person has to get out. So because I was I was lower ranking, he was a sergeant, so the Army would want to keep him. So I had to make the choice to leave I was going to be medically discharged anyway, for breaking my back and Humvee rollover. But it was the fact that I should have stayed in, I should have gotten med boarded out and waited that other year and a half. So when I got out, I had 100% disability. I chose to take the family care chapter, got out early so that we can get out at the same time, which changed my life dramatically because when I got out, I didn't have a disability rating. They didn't have any of the paperwork done, so I didn't get my disability until 2 years later. We struggled financially. We were living in one bedroom with a baby and a dog, and if I would have gotten out and have 100% disability, we would have been off, well, much better off financially, as well as making, you know, our lives better because we were just two different people. But those are something like some of the nuances in the military that people don't realize affect the relationship is rules and regulations. People get married so that they stay together at a duty station. People get married because they want to get out of the barracks. We talk about love and all the great things that people get married for and companionship and best friends, but that's not always the case either. And that will cause a lot of discomfort in the household if they're not happy. And so the couple counseling or any kind of like retreats to keep the couples together who want to be couples, I 100% support. It can definitely teach you a lot about each other, even like team building exercises, like going in a canoe or doing a warrior dash together, getting each other over a 6-foot wall can be something that brings back a spark in a relationship to physically depend on each other too. So there's a lot of different types of couples within the military as well.
That's a good point about people who join. So like everyone here is, you know, a wonderful family member, but there are a lot of people that join because they're running from broken families or they are trying to create, you know, their own chosen family. I know, you know, Dylan loves his family, but as he already told you, he doesn't connect with them. You know, a lot it's like on their shoulders to connect. So his friends are his chosen family. And I think when we look at treating dual service, family members and veterans, they have to be separated first. And like, you can't be in a healthy relationship with others if you're not in a healthy relationship with yourself. So helping the veteran, you know, utilize those benefits or utilize their service connected benefits to be in a healthier space themselves is really important before bringing them together. And the same thing, just to add on, the same thing for, I hear all these wonderful non-military family panelists, Jillian, Cindy, you know, Mary Jo, you guys keep saying, how do we help the veteran? Helping you guys, you know, helping our family members is helping us, like the amount of love and effort you put in. So definitely, you know, understanding that the first step to fixing a dynamic is isolating the individual players and seeing what you can do to help every individual, whether they're dual military or whether they're military civilian.
That's such a huge comment, Melanie, that you just dropped here with 10 minutes left. Seriously, that's, I mean, that says it all. Like, I think that the services are so segregated in a way that's not like towards the common goal. And they can be like, I'm going to help this person. And in effect, then the rest of the family will be served as well, right? Like it does all tie together. And I think that that's such a huge comment to put out there, because we as clinicians can get overwhelmed and be like, we need to fix all of this. And as a product, you don't fix any of it, right? And the veteran, I mean, wants the family to be intact and healthy, right? And that's going to be the most helpful to them. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, employing military spouses is, you know, a great way to help veterans bring a second income into that family, help that spouse, you know, have purpose. Speaking of spouses.
So this is a thing I was actually curious on touching on when we're talking about the segregation of resources and things like that. And specifically that verbiage had me thinking of how far disconnected all of these resources are from various veterans for various reasons. And I find most of the problems in veteran communities happen because you are either separated from physical resources or you're separated from emotional or mental resources. And the issue is, there's so many people who are inhibited to reaching those resources. Elderly veterans or lower income veterans literally are barred by not being able to transport themselves to resources that would be able to help them. in-person meetings, etc. Many of them are alienated in various communities or places for various reasons. And until we find a way to address going into that interconnectedness and actually getting a way to get them to the resources, we're going to continue having lots of difficulty with them, because for the weakest of the veterans around us, the most vulnerable of us, ultimately are the ones that have the hardest time obtaining and reaching these resources. And even when it comes to Danny talking about getting VA disability and things like that, there's so many people who have issue after getting their VA disability trying to go to the VA because they're scared to go to the VA hospital, because if something improves in them, they are afraid the VBA will take away their benefits at that point. So now you've given the veteran one bit of their benefits, but then gatekeeping the other half because they're scared to lose what little thing they've managed to get.
Absolutely, that's so true. 100% valid information. And remember that veterans also get treated differently. When I came back from service, I had a broken back, PTSD, MST, which is military sexual trauma, and postpartum depression. My daughter was 6 months old when I got out. I couldn't access the VA after 6 months for physical therapy because I never deployed, but because my ex-husband did deploy, he was eligible to have VA services. And I remember the hatred that I had felt and the resonating like feelings of like, because I didn't deploy, I don't get the same services that he gets, but we both served. And so remember that there's a respect to each person's service when it comes to dual military, because their experiences can be completely different. And sometimes, especially for Melanie and I often hear like, thank your husband for his service. Like, remember that females serve too, and we deserve just as much respect. Sometimes it can be really harmful to hear that when you're in a car or you're passing and tell your husband thank you for his service. I think that is something that can be really damaging to someone's pride or just like their service, because they're seen for their gender rather than their ability. And the way that the VA system is, like, not every veteran has access to care. So like we have to be able to have resources for veterans who were dishonorably discharged other than honorably discharged, because if we don't, we're not helping all the veterans. We're only helping veterans who are honorably discharged.
And without those benefits, not the burden, but the pathway that they will achieve gets offset by their family. So if a veteran loses their GI Bill because of maybe insubordination, because of hazing or bullying, right? Now they get an other than honorable. That GI Bill that they'd go to school with for free and be able to, to have an income, help them support their family. Now the family's supporting them. So I think there's this hope when veterans serve that they can come out and be a support to their family. And so ensuring that there are resources where veterans don't get those benefits that they, should have gotten, so that it doesn't offset onto their family. It helps strengthen the whole unit. So, sorry, Danny, I always interject.
It's okay. And even for veterans who were retired, they served for 16 to 30 years, depending on, what time they got out. And they may not even know the resources, and their whole lives they've been in, and they've always supported their family. They always had childcare, they always had food on the table, they had housing, and now they don't have those things. And the transition out can be very hard for them, because even though they were successful in the military and achieved high ranking, they, as a civilian, that doesn't match up. And if you can't get housing, and if you can't figure out the barriers to TRICARE, that can be something that is really difficult to navigate. And so to help the veterans who have retired is also like another separate entity too, because their benefits are going to be different to someone who only serves anywhere between 2 and 10 years, and their families get very much affected if someone had been in for 30 years and now supplementing outside.
So we have 5 minutes left. Usually we have more time and more space for like the audience to drop questions in, but this was such a full panel discussion and really just went so naturally. So sorry we didn't have enough for that. There was one question that came in. And Chris, if you don't mind me, I think you brought this up in the prep for this panel about the kind of the stigma of active duty reaching out for mental health treatment. And how that's changed over the years. Anyone else can speak to it as well, but if we could just touch on that quickly, because somebody did put that comment, I think it's a good question.
I think it's still a fair question to raise. What's remarkable is how when I first enlisted, literally, that was a question on accessions packets. And it would be a barring of service. If you sought help, you could not be enlisted. And if you were in service and you saw help, you could lose your security clearance. Now, this really, I first enlisted in 1981. It really wasn't to the turn of the century that there started to be some changes. And even then they were slow. My period as a brigade commander was 2008 to 2010. And I did the best I could to lead by example there when I would address my paratroopers. I think a lot of my paratroopers knew that my wife was a social worker, but I would talk about mental health every time. I may have had another topic I needed to talk about, but I always made sure I mentioned there's nothing unmanly or unwomanly about reaching out for help. We saw this firsthand. My unit was really trained to jump out of airplanes and be on the first wave of attack troops, and here we were in a low intensity conflict. And, it was just gray everywhere, and paratroopers were dying, getting names, innocent civilians were being killed. It was all kinds of things that we would call unspeakable acts happening. We call them unspeakable for a reason, because there aren't the words to reach. And so my paratroopers, they'd get home back to Fort Bragg, and after this, elation of being home, all of a sudden, I'd have paratroopers driving 95 miles an hour on the other side of the road. They were trying to outrun this. And literally I would say, look, I don't care if you can run a 4-minute mile. You can't outrun this. But sir, I can't believe what I experienced. And I know, but you're going to have to turn and face it, because it's coming. And so it just was like pushing a rock uphill and to try to change the culture. Now, fortunately, some of the legal and sort of bureaucratic things have moved, but there's still more work to be done just to normalize because really, is it normalizing to bring weakness? No, it's normalizing for resiliency and strength, because it's a reality we all face. And that's why I started my own remarks here this afternoon by just thanking this community, because of what an instrumental role you're playing in saving lives. We all want a flourishing life for everyone. Sometimes we have to start with just saving the life to open up the space for a flourishing life. So, I would just, I saw the comments in the chat. I think they're spot on. And I can tell you that, in my time in government, after I left the Army, I did everything I could to advocate for the things. There is a new law called the Clay Hunt Act, and it actually addressed troops that left service under other than honorable conditions, because you'd look at when the war first started, if you didn't have an honorable discharge, you didn't have access to benefits. And, the military's first response to all the craziness we all had up here, some of the soldiers were acting out. They could end up with a general discharge just to get them out of the way so we could keep churning troops back overseas, and they didn't have access to benefits. So this was absolutely insane. So we did change the law to try to provide more access. There's still more work to be done, but that Clay Hunt Act, it's called the SAVE Act. It was actually for a trooper that took his life, who was suffering from mental illness, and it actually expanded mental health services for veterans who didn't even have a general or an honorable discharge. So, there's that. And then there's also just what also has been mentioned, Dylan mentioned, it's that warm handoff. I tried to work with other colleagues on this to make a difference. I think we made maybe a small difference. But the big thing is that among the elected leaders, what they think is we just need to keep putting more rocks in the rucksack of people on active duty. And I kept telling them, no, what's really missing is the transition. It's, you know, you keep putting all these rocks in the rucksacks of the last 60 to 90 days. Just try to think about yourself, about what it's like when you're about ready to go through a transition. You're already distracted. Now you're giving up. What you really need to do is make sure that somebody goes from active duty to actually back home, that somebody's reaching out, knocking on their door. Because some of the vets don't even, they want to forget. They want to just leave it behind. And what we really need is a knock on the door and saying, look, not a hard sell here. Here's my card. You know, we're here for you. You have certain benefits and we're available to you always to talk. So, I mean, this can, in some cases, this actually is happening at the county level, but it's not happening at the scale that it needs to. I have to tell you that I actually saw some National Guard units do this better than active duty. Not all, but I saw some National Guard units with the Yellow Ribbon program do really well. So I just want to say, I'm glad you did raise that, because we're not done. We're better than we were in the late part of the last century, but we're not where we need to be. And so, you know,
Oh, Chris, I have a question. Anissa, is everyone on this panel, if we can ask later, because I know one of the interns for Niswanis is going to send out like a list. They were talking in the panel, sending out a list of resources. Would we be able to put our emails and a little bit of information about the panelists on that with those resources so people could reach out maybe for individualized support?
Yeah, Melanie, we're completely on the same page today. I was just going to say, like, panelists, if you want to put your email addresses in the chat, so people can find you, you can do that. And then also, yes, I think we should add them to the resource list. That's a great idea. Send your information to Amelia, each panelist, if you're comfortable being a resource to the community. And then she said there was an intern at NASW that's going to compile a list of resources that were brought up on the chat today. So they'll add that to it as well. But yeah, if you want to include them in the chat too, because I think there's a million questions probably rattling around and we didn't even
when I hear Chris and Mary Jo talk, I'm like, wow, they need to be on like development panel.
Yeah,
They're
seriously.
dream.
It is 2:02 though, so we have to stop. I know there's a ton of people on in our schedules. I see people signing off already. So I want to give Amelia a chance to just give them the CEU directions one more time before we end. And I just want to thank you guys. You did so wonderful today, giving a wealth of information. You were vulnerable and informative. And as always, just like poured your hearts out really towards a great purpose, which is just increasing competency for all of us in terms of working with veterans and families. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for organizing it, and Amelia. I really appreciate it. Special time together with all of you. Thank you.
Amelia, do you want to just drop the evaluation link? Yeah.
I've put the evaluation link in a couple times, but I'm going to put it in again. I have a different thing copied to my paste right in this moment. So first, I'm just going to put our Veterans Mental Health Training Initiative page into the chat. Might be where you found the registration for this program, but we have 3 other upcoming CEs on military mothers, on veterans strengthen community through continued service, and on veteran service officers coming up. So I want to bring attention to that. I also am now going to put the evaluation for this particular panel into the chat as well. I've put that in there a few times. As I mentioned, you must complete the evaluation by this upcoming Thursday, November 9th. You will then receive your CE certificate within 10 business days of this presentation as a downloadable PDF. So I've put that evaluation link in a few times. I'm going to say that it's also going to send to everyone's email, the email that you registered with after this program closes. So it's going to take about 10 minutes after I click end here on Zoom for that to send to your email. So don't think it's going to pop up immediately. Might take about 10 to 15 minutes to receive it. If you have any issues receiving that evaluation or any other questions about our programming, just reach out to NASW, reply to any emails that you have gotten from us, and we'll make sure to get back to you. I'm just going to end by saying for myself, thank you so deeply to the panelists for everything that you shared today. It was just so powerful. I'll be sending you the chat log, as well as when we'll be compiling a list of resources information from NASW for all the attendees. But there's so many thanks, and it's just so evident what an impact you've made today. I want to make sure you're able to read it because I can't communicate it myself. And thank you to all the attendees that have joined us. We had over 300 people with us, around like, I think 320 unique users, it said, which is really awesome for a Monday afternoon when it's beautiful outside. So just thank you, everyone. I think that is so heartwarming and promising that so many people chose to spend their time with us this afternoon. Is there anything that any of the panelists would like to get off their chest or say in closing before I end this program?
Just thank you to everyone for once again letting me share, Christy, and just want folks to do what she would do. Just do something great. I know you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. That's the way to end it. So thank you all. You'll be receiving an email shortly, and have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.